Three things. The first is, I'm not Dr. John Greenhow. I am his emergency substitute. So the second thing is, a couple of weeks ago when I preached coming off vacation, I said I probably had too much time to think about those texts in preparing a sermon. Now you get to see what it's like when I've had no time to prepare a text for a sermon, but I think it'll still provide interest. And the third thing is hymn 602, Yezu, Yezu, a mariachi band, you know? they really pulled that off, I gotta say. Well, if I were John, what would I have done? I would have started with Mark text and weave it back into the other two, Isaiah and James. And in Mark, we have the story of the Syrophoenician woman, and you have this famous exchange with Jesus about, you know, the feeding the children before the dogs are fed. And people wonder, oh, you know, how could Jesus be so cool and whatnot? And I really think this is a straw man argument, because Jesus has already been, as we've been reading Mark all summer, has already been over to the other side several times, you know, crossing the waters with his disciples. Very turbulent, because they don't want to make this trip with him. They are very much into boundaries between Jew and Gentile specifically. And Jesus is forcing them to go. And the Gentiles aren't too happy to receive him either, honestly. In chapter 4, he goes to Gennesaret and heals the demoniac. And the villagers' response is, would you please go now? Because they don't want to think about this. They have their lives, they don't want God interrupting them. So they send Jesus packing on that trip. But he comes back and he's healing the sick at the same place a chapter later. So I think it's really just, you know, it's just to put the rhetorical question out there and have Jesus make that pronouncement finally, saying, yes, you know, these are part of the family. And, you know, it's this kind of faith that we don't find, you know, back home, you know, so to speak. But thinking about that too, and just reflecting a little deeper on the Syrophoenician woman and making connections back to Isaiah and James, it strikes me you can look at her, you know, two ways. And I think what's the key to that is, as I always say, you know, it's the whole idea that is the Bible true? No, it's truer. I mean, this is not a story about Jesus. You know, it's a story about us and our relationship to God and with each other. As you know, as Jesus his teachings and whatnot claim that for us. And I always ask us to look for a character in the story, you know, the role we're playing. And I think it is the Syrophoenician woman. And again, this will get us back into James and Isaiah. But I think it's the game we play with ourselves. First of all, it's the us-then game, where there are insiders and outsiders. But I think the real trap here is that we don't see ourselves as being the outsiders. And I think that's the beauty of this passage. That all this while we think, hey, we're doing God's will, we're this, we're that, and you know, there's that mission field out there where we have to bring them home to Jesus if they'll only show up at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. But it's that whole sense that you know, we belong. And again, that's us thinking that. And the Syrophoenician woman, I think, is on a deeper level telling us, you know, about our own separation from God, in particular, tied us to Isaiah, and from each other in a rather interesting way. This will link us to James. Isaiah, we have a smidgen of the 35th chapter. And this is, and again, pardon me for becoming a biblical scholar. I'm not an Old Testament specialist, but I do know this, that there are 3 prophets, at least, who write under the name of Isaiah, as their writings are included in what's called the book of Isaiah. And we're talking about a span of about 120 to 150 years. We go all the way from the Israel before Assyria, you know, erased it on the map, up to the fall of Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians, and then into the exile with them. So we have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah. And what's interesting about 35, at least interesting to me, is that you have a bit of editing going on. Biblical scholars agree that 3rd Isaiah has a hand in going back and adding to or introducing some ideas, planting seeds, if you will, in 1st Isaiah. And doing that as a way, I guess, to unify the book and have them all pointing in a particular direction. And what he's introducing is just what you see happening in Mark's gospel. That the blind now see, the deaf can hear and speak, the lame can walk, and all of these new things are happening. Waters, pools of water, streaming up in the desert, and a whole new order is beginning. And central to that are the ones who used to be on the margins, the forgotten, or the ignored, and ignored so much that they are forgotten. And this is Isaiah's way of saying, no, this has always been the thought, that it has always been that the poor and those who are on the outside, on the edge, who are thrown there, are the ones who are most important and are central to this new order that will appear, and they will lead us, into that. Again, just interesting how that's written in. Wednesday morning, again, forgive the biblical inserts here, because this is off the cuff. But in our Wednesday morning study, we're looking at the New Testament theology and Christology as it forms. We talked this very week in the lecture about how the Christology, the doctrines that the church finally arrives when they begin to posit these. This becomes our doctrinal foundation. They do it by going backwards, through the Bible, so that, as I've said before, the Gospel of John, we are forced to read Matthew, Mark, and Luke through that lens, and that Christology kind of bleeds back. I said that a couple of weeks ago, that, it's like, oh, this was always the way we thought, even though we know the disciples saw Jesus in a completely different way, as did the early members of the movement, just again from the writings that we have. We know that it was not the theology of the Christian church as we know it today. So interesting that that's happening. But again, the point in Isaiah is that, it is those who are on the outside that we have forced there who are going to become central to God's new kingdom. But the other thing is, too, is the shift in who are the enemies of God. It's not the Assyrians. It's not the Babylonians. It is anyone who works against God's will to have the poor and the others brought to the middle. It's those who have done the ignoring, the pushing, and the forgetting. Those are the enemies of God who do not fulfill God's will for them, which then brings us to James, where he talks about the distinctions and acts of favoritism. And I love this. The person with gold rings and fine clothes comes in, and someone in dirty clothes comes in. What do? You say to the person in the fine clothes, hey, sit up here. We got a great seat right up front. You won't miss a thing. The bishop might even look at you, whatever. But those who come in and look, poor and whatnot, it's like, take a seat back in the corner, and we'll call you when we're ready for it. And how we do show favoritism. And his point is, again, that, God, as he says, has chosen the poor to be rich and heirs of the kingdom, promised to those who love him. And then goes on to say, but you have dishonored the poor. And is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? And an interesting point, we do seem to, well, as somebody said, we have in this country, for instance, the best justice system that money can buy. And we know it is true that we seem to give a pass to those who have wealth and power and influence. That's true in the small and also true, in a macro sense. And we've seen that. And we do seem to cater to those who have power and influence and wealth. And James is saying, hey, this is really not the way, of God. And he even questions, why do you do that? And these are the same people who would drag you into court. Yeah, and I'm looking for examples, but I think the one that just popped into my head was that as we look at, our world today, the failures of so many systems, and particularly our ecosystem. I don't know why Elon Musk came in, but when he's ready to take that rocket to the colonization of Mars, I don't think we're going to have kids. I'm just saying. But anyway, James, brings us to that idea again that we need to, be servants to those who need us most, who we have marginalized, who we have forgotten. And this is more or less that reminder that, as it says, if a brother or sister is naked, lacks daily food, and one says, go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill, and you do not supply their bodily needs, what good is that? And again, I know we do a lot of work here. We, the church is excellent at applying band-aids to those who present themselves. But you also know from me that I'm one who believes the church should be a bit more militant and begin to push on the systems. I've shared that expression before. That we're very good at pulling someone out of the river, drying them off, and gently setting them back in until they go down to the next station. We need to be more of a mind to go up the river and see who it is that's pumping them in the first place. I think James calls us that. Well, that's all I got off the cuff. So, and like I say, in my sermons, I just like to be that guy that starts the conversation. So, for 18 years, I've been giving you something to talk about for dinner. But, and I hope this falls in line with that. So we'll say amen to that, and please let us stand for prayer. Or for our sermon hymn and then our affirmations.